Welcome to Question Time. On tonight's panel, Vicky Ford, a former investment banker and MEP, currently the government's Minister for Children and Families. Labour's Shadow Health Secretary for the past 4 years and a former advisor to Gordon Brown and Ed Miliband, Jon Ashworth. A consultant surgeon and oncologist for nearly 20 years before becoming an MP. Joining us from Ayrshire, the SNP's health spokesperson at Westminster, Philippa Whitford. Dame Donna Kinnair, nurse, professor, specialist in child protection, and since 2019, General Secretary and Chief Executive of the world's biggest nursing union, the Royal College of Nursing. And also joining us down the line, a police officer for nearly 40 years and, until his retirement just over a year ago, Chief Constable of the Durham Police Force, Mike Barton. Good evening to you, and of course welcome to my guests here in the studio and to Philippa and Mike who are joining us down the line. Welcome also, of course, to our QT50 audience. We saw some of you last week. We have some new faces today. And for everyone watching at home, all of you, of course, please do join in the conversation the usual way on social media at BBC Question Time. Let's hear what you've got to say as well. OK, we'll start off with our first question, which is from Prasanna Surya Kumaran, also known as PS. Off you go.
Thank you. Is the NHS still open for business?
Well, Prasanna, you are a surgeon, so let's hear your view first of all.
OK, well, I mean, I think, of course, for certain routine care, it's been put on pause, but overwhelmingly, the answer is yes. I mean, we still have many conditions that aren't COVID-related that people still have to present with, heart attacks, strokes, accidents, urgent cancer treatments that we still need to deal with. And I think hospitals have been very good at trying to create capacity, shift patients around between hot areas where they have COVID patients and cold areas where they can still carry on doing non-COVID work. I mean, it's becoming, of course, an increasing struggle. But yes, absolutely, the NHS is still open for time-sensitive, critical emergency and urgent work.
And Donna, we heard today that the highest number of people ever recorded are on waiting lists. And actually, there are some hospitals where critical care is being delayed. In London, for example, patients who need cancer treatment within 28 days are having their operations delayed.
Well, the NHS has experienced unprecedented pressures. We've never been here before. And so you're quite right, aren't you, PS, that we're pulling together, we're doing the best we can in terms of delivering care to patients that need it. I know that some operations are continuing. My own son is a surgeon, and so I know that he's gone to an independent hospital to perform some surgery to keep those waiting lists down. But we've never been in this situation. It is unprecedented. 50% of patients on wards have COVID. We're up to capacity in some of our critical care units. You know that we're delivering high dependency care on wards, and actually we also have a massive shortage of staff who are sick themselves, or we started with not enough staff when we entered this pandemic. So yes, we are open for business, but we're only doing that by pulling together and giving the best care that we can.
And we've got some hands up in the audience. Some of you also, I know, work in the NHS as well. Beth?
Hi, yeah. So with reference to what Don has been saying, I wanted to know what the panel thought about with staff shortages proving a major issue in intensive care units, what they felt about staffing ratios switching from 1-to-1 to 3-to-1. And
that's your experience because you're working in intensive care, is that right?
Yeah, I'm a medical student, but I work as a HCA in intensive care.
What's a healthcare assistant? I think that is. And how do you feel it's working? Because you're seeing it firsthand.
I think most of the time it's fine, but when things start to go wrong, you have patients deteriorate, and it also depends on the layout. So obviously that works fine if you've got one big stretch of patients, but not so well if you've got patients in units that aren't usually intensive care and kind of in hidden away areas and things like that.
Philippa?
Well, I think that, this highlights the danger of not controlling the epidemic, of allowing the cases to rise. People say, well, we shouldn't be locked down, we shouldn't be limiting things because it's impacting on people getting their other treatments. But it is the same NHS. that's having to deal with COVID and deal with non-COVID. Certainly routine operations have had to be scaled back, but I would echo what PS says in the importance of people coming forward. There was a lot of concern during the first wave that people were getting the impression that the NHS was just shut unless you had COVID. And then very quickly, when the numbers of people coming as emergencies or coming forward with cancer symptoms dropped, then it was very important to get that message out. The NHS is still there. Yes, it's under pressure. Routine operations are having to wait, but cancer operations, treatments, and particularly if anyone has a worrying symptom, you know, don't ignore it. Get in touch with your GP. They might speak to you like this over the video first, but they will actually speak to you. They will then proceed to organise the test that you need. No one should be ignoring other health problems because of COVID.
And Philippa, let's talk about Scotland for a minute, because large parts of Scotland, I mean the central belt, the most populous areas of Scotland, have been pretty much in lockdown since September. And yet the Scottish Government has admitted, as has around the UK, that COVID is running out of control. So what's gone wrong?
Well, in actual fact, if you look at the numbers, you'll see that we have less than half the incidence of COVID in Scotland that you have south of the border, and
but you've got more deaths than the first wave, for example.
The second and third wave. So
but you've got more deaths than the first wave, for example, Philippa.
Sorry?
You've got more deaths than during the first wave, for example.
Well, as does everyone. I mean, we are now, our numbers are much higher than the first wave, as has been the experience right across the UK. But of the four nations, our numbers, our case rate numbers, are the lowest. But with this new variant, it just is so difficult to drive the cases down. So while thankfully lockdown is working, the cases are dropping in all four nations. What you're seeing is it's very difficult to drive down. So I think that what people thought were reasonable ways to behave in the early autumn and the summer, and little kind of pushing the edges that they got away with, I think we just won't get away with this new variant. So people do need to follow the rules, because otherwise, you know, patients will wait longer to be seen in the NHS if we end up that intensive care units simply take over operating theatres and other wards. So it is important. But in actual fact, if you look at the data in Scotland, you will see our rate is the lowest of the four nations.
Andrea, you've got your hand up.
Sorry. Yeah, hi. Sorry, I just wanted to say, is it not the case, though, that Scotland are testing fewer than half of patients per 100,000 in England? So it's not really true to say that we're having better case rates of COVID than England, because we're simply not testing as much people. And also, you know, we're waiting such a long time for test results to come through. My mother, who's in a care home, had a COVID test last Friday, and I only got her results yesterday. And why is it taking so long?
Elizabeth?
Do you think, as far as staffing is concerned, we're reaping the whirlwind of doing away with bursaries for nurse trainees? I know they were brought back in September last year, but I think the government's looking forward now to a 10-year plan for the NHS once, fingers crossed, we're through this crisis. And is that something that we need to bear in mind to make sure that we get the young staff trained and they're able to be trained because they can afford to be trained in the future?
And Richard?
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that last point. But also to add, I don't know if the panel aware, I drive ambulances, I take people home. There's a distinct feeling that the NHS is open, but it's absolutely full. Beds are full. And we feel, I can't say that I'm not a consultant, I'm not medical, but I do take people home. And it feels that we're taking people home too early. We get to care homes or we get to people's homes, and it feels that those people shouldn't really be going home. We have people saying to us, that person seems to be more ill than when they went into hospital. And maybe that's a result of the pressure that's happening. But it'd be interesting on your comments of you guys about that.
John?
Well, I just want to thank, first of all, Richard and Beth and PS for the work that you're doing in the NHS. You must be under a level of strain which is just extraordinary. And I'm sure I speak for everybody on the panel and just thanking you for what you're doing throughout the year, but particularly at this time. Is our NHS open? Yes, it is, and I want to reiterate the point that Philippa made and PS, that if you are ill, don't put off going to see or getting in touch with your GP. If you are ill, seek medical attention.
But when you say it's open for business, we hear day after day about elective operations being cancelled, people not managing to get appointments. So it's open for business, but in what sense? It's definitely not open for business as usual.
Well, this is the wider issue, the wider problem that a crisis is engulfing the NHS more widely, and it's engulfing every bit of the NHS. It's under a level of pressure that is unprecedented, as we have heard, because of the way in which the virus has got out of control. We've got more people in hospital in this wave than we had in the first wave. There's more people in intensive care in this wave than we had in the first wave. We had over 1,500 people recorded as dying yesterday. That's more than every minute in 24 hours. Across the United Kingdom, we've had over 80,000 people die. In England, over 72,000. That's almost the capacity of Old Trafford football stadium. And it's only going to get worse in the weeks to come. But it didn't have to be like this. It didn't have to be like this. The government were too late in locking down. They never put in place a proper test and trace strategy. We've still got millions of people going to work today, and their workplaces are not COVID secure. And if people are sick and they are ill, they still cannot get access to decent sick pay and financial support. So there's thousands and tens of thousands of people who are ill, don't take a test, carry on going into work and spread the virus. So we've got to fix these issues now. By the end of this month, it will have been 12 months since we had our first recorded case in the United Kingdom, and we have still not fixed these issues. And unless we fix these issues urgently, we won't save the NHS and we won't get on top of the transmission of this virus.
Vicky.
So I agree with you about thanking our NHS staff. I'm a doctor's wife. He's an oncologist, cancer specialist. I know how hard they're all working and have been working all year. And it is really, really tough at the moment. The Chief Medical Officer has warned us that we are so close to the NHS becoming completely overwhelmed. And we mustn't let that happen. You know, we're keeping the prioritisation on cancer care and treatments. And actually, many hundreds of thousands of people were seen between March and August for cancer care. But it is tight, and if we reach that overwhelmed status, it will be really difficult. It's really important that if you need that treatment for cancer or your heart or a stroke, that you can come forward. A lot of the NHS has moved online. The 24/7 mental health support is really good.
Who have cancer treatment, who require cancer treatment, just aren't getting it.
In my constituency, I'm an Essex MP. It's one of the areas where we got the first wave of that new variant first, and it really hit really fast. It hit really fast. So I am hearing non-urgent treatments being postponed, and that is really challenging.
What about the urgent ones? Because there are some urgent ones being postponed as well.
Absolutely trying to keep the urgent treatments happening, maybe happening in a different place from before.
Okay.
But it is really important that people can come forward, but it's tight. The most important thing here, therefore, is for the rest of us to follow those rules. And that's why we've gone back to the rules of March, you know, stay at home, protect the NHS, save lives, rolling out the vaccine, rolling out more tests. Track and trace has taken 6 million people away who would otherwise have been out spreading the virus. You know, 800,000 test capacity every day. So that's coming, but we've got to, this new spread, this new variant spreads so fast, we've got to follow the rules.
PS, you wanted to come back in?
Yeah, I just wanted to, echo everything everybody said, which is that we're still open for business, but for time-sensitive, time-critical things. But I also wanted to just make a comment really about what Vicky's just said about the lockdown now. I mean, I still go to work and drive into central London. And compared to the first lockdown, there are a lot more people out. It just seems like this lockdown is not the same level of lockdown as it was in the first wave. So either we believe that lockdowns work, in which case we should lock down properly for a shorter period of time to get virus under control, or we don't believe that lockdown's worse. But at the moment, it seems that we're kind of doing half a lockdown and the virus is still spreading. We're damaging people's livelihoods with businesses and things, and yet we're not controlling the virus. So I think we should decide what we want to do, but do it properly. Whereas at the moment, I feel like coffee shops are still open. There's still a huge amount of traffic. It takes me twice as long now to drive to work as it did in the first lockdown. So I just think that we're kind of straddling between two different approaches and not really getting either one right.
Mike.
Thanks very much. Is it open for business? Well, the judge of that is whether the public feel confident that they can actually go to hospital or see their GP. And so I think it's crucial that we get that message across that we've heard from all the panellists, that people who are ill should actually present themselves to their health professional. Sadly, if we look at the excess deaths in 2020, it's been the most deaths that we've actually seen in the country since 1940. So if the health service is partly there to make sure that people stay alive, then that would suggest that it's not been all that successful a year. I think when you see stories about fire brigade officers and police officers driving ambulances, the NHS might be open, but it's certainly not operationally optimal. And finally, this week is the week where GPs up and down the country see more patients than ever presenting with mental health issues. And that's one of the issues that I don't think the health services of this country have dealt with adequately. As a country, we haven't dealt with this adequately for years. And sadly, in my professional role as police officers, generally, half, whatever proportion of our work, but a considerable proportion of our work as police officers was mental health. That's going to get worse. So just as GPs, quite rightly, are vaccinating loads of people, there are fewer and fewer appointments for people with mental health difficulties. So it may be open, but it's not optimal.
Let me move on, take another question. But before I do, I just want to say that next week we're doing a programme from Northern Ireland. And of course, as you can imagine, we're looking out for audience from there, from Northern Ireland. So if you'd like to take part, who knows, maybe you could tell us what's on the shelves in the shops at the moment. Do come and join our virtual audience. You can get in touch by going to the Question Time website and you follow the instructions there and we will get back to you. And of course, we'd love to hear from you. So that's Northern Ireland next week. Let's take our next question now, which is from Sean Brown.
Hi, good evening. Is mid-February a realistic target to vaccinate the 4 most vulnerable cohorts, or is this just another media-grabbing headline?
John?
I think the government will meet this target. Everyone I've spoken to who understands what's happening with vaccination seems to think they will meet this target.
So the government's doing well?
I think the government needs to go faster and further.
But do you think the government's doing well at the moment?
There is no question that everyone who's been involved in the distribution of the vaccine in the last couple of weeks, our GPs, our NHS staff, those who have been working on the logistics, and we always forget about the people who work on the logistics. Let's thank them as well.
What about
all deserve congratulations.
What about the choices made by the government?
And I think the task force who has made the choices of which vaccines to purchase, yes, have done a good job. So I think they will meet that target, but they need to go further and faster. Because if we were able to vaccinate just under 30 million people, we would reduce hospitalisations and deaths by 99%, and we should be targeting that now. So that means getting the supplies from the manufacturers. One thing the government haven't been able to do is actually tell us how many doses are coming next week and the week after. But it also means mobilising more GPs and properly resourcing them. It means mobilising community pharmacists as well, because community pharmacists are integral and at the heart of many communities. I see that myself in Leicester. But crucially, where I am a little bit disappointed with the government is that they haven't gone fast enough here and now to vaccinate frontline NHS staff. Last week, the Doctors' Union, the BMA, said 46,000 staff are off sick with COVID. Today, we learned that 1 in 10 nurses are off sick with COVID. They need protection of the vaccine. In the first wave, the government failed to protect them properly by not providing adequate PPE. Now it feels that they're too slow again to protect them properly by rolling out the vaccination. So it's gone well so far. They've got to do better on NHS staff. But I think they can be more ambitious and they can go further by moving us towards 30 million jabs as quickly as possible.
Well, there you are, Vicky. We don't often hear the opposition saying it's gone well, so I think you want to bank that one for now, despite the other criticism as well, I acknowledge.
I'm being constructive.
You're being constructive, John.
As I always
like
am.
that. We like that on this programme.
As I always am.
So the target that Sean mentioned, I just want to be clear exactly what the target is. Is the target to vaccinate 14 million people by mid-February, or is it to offer to vaccinate 14 million people?
The aim is to get through those first three categories of the very most vulnerable and the health.
Because I noticed the word offer has sort of crept in.
And the aim is to let's get this jabs in people's arms as quickly as the manufacturers can make it and it can be approved.
So just so,
okay?
so what is the pledge? Is it to vaccinate 14
those
million people?
Those first categories, which I understand is around those numbers, plus, as you say, the health and care workers who are supporting.
So it's to actually have vaccinated them by then.
And to have those vaccinated, because once you cover those first categories, you've absolutely covered the most vulnerable people to dying from it. And that, so it's amazing. You know, they've done 3 million jabs already. The Oxford vaccine, Oxford AstraZeneca, absolutely world-class vaccine because it can be done at room temperature, which means we can get it out to more places.
And can I just check, is it 3 million? Because when I last looked, we hadn't got
3 million
the
doses.
I thought it was 2.6.
3 million doses. So some people have had 2 doses already.
Right, okay.
But I spoke to the vaccines minister this afternoon.
Well, got it from the horse's mouth, okay.
Absolutely. 96% of the population are living within 10 miles of a vaccination centre. That was last week before we started to open those mega centres as well. Rolling it out to community pharmacists, but rolling it away out to community pharmacists, that means that we get the maximum amount of doses in people's arms as quickly as possible. So we've rolled out some more today, but we really need to make sure that every single dose that we can get from the manufacturers can get into one of those vulnerable people's arms straight away and roll that out. And if we can get more of it, the manufacturing process can happen faster, it will be happening faster.
Lots of hands up. Let's hear from some of you in our audience. James.
Thanks. Yeah, I just want to align myself with John's comments, really, that I do think the government will achieve that target. But is it not worrying that actually the patients in sort of the 5th and 6th cohort of sort of 65 and 60 are now the ones in intensive care? And yes, the larger age bands are more vulnerable, but we need to be more ambitious. We need to get it into the arms of the full list of people. And I think it's coming down the age brackets. So I think the government needs to be more ambitious, really.
George?
Yeah, I'd like to know which of the vaccines is more future-proof now we've got all these new strains coming.
OK. Jim?
Hi, this is probably a bit contentious, but I'm interested in knowing why it's taking offering GPs a triple bonus per vaccine to persuade them to vaccinate as many people as they possibly can. Doesn't seem quite right.
I know that's happening this week. I think it's then going back down again next week. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Why does it have to happen this week? You know, why not just do it?
Do you want to answer that quickly?
So I don't know. I know that GPs do normally get paid for extra hour and extra treatments, and some of my GPs are standing up working all weekend this weekend to get those jabs into people's arms as quickly as possible. But in terms of why are we going for these top categories first, what I was told today is if you vaccinate 20 people in a care home, you've saved 1 life. If you vaccinate 250 people in one of those other top 3 categories, you've saved 1 life. And that's the way we look at it. By the time, I'm in my mid-50s, by the time we get to my age, I have a higher level of survival than someone in their 70s or 80s. So it's absolutely right that all of us make sure that those really vulnerable older age groups get treated first.
But I mean, James has asked a really, really good question, because there's some of your colleagues, Vicky, on your backbenchers who say that once you've hit these top 4 categories, these 14 million in mid-Feb, you can then take us out of lockdown and you can release the restrictions. But what James has said has hit the nail on the head. As of certainly of the latest data, the data comes out towards the end of each week. The latest data shows that the average age of somebody in intensive care at the moment is 61. And that's not the top 4 categories, which is why I make my point. We've got to go further and faster. If we can do around 30 million, you'll reduce hospitalisations and deaths. And just on George's point, which is about the new strains and the variants, I mean, this is really, really worrying. We think the vaccines will be effective against particularly the strain which came from Kent, and we think it will be effective against the strain which emanated in South Africa. But the point is that when there is more virus circulating, there are more opportunities for the virus to mutate and for new strains to emerge. So we are in a race against evolution, if you like. We've got to both suppress the virus and reduce transmission and do all the things that reduce transmission, and we've got to roll out vaccination as quickly as possible. So I would really urge the ministers, in my constructive way that I'm saying it,
well, you've said that already. You don't need to say it twice. Donna.
So we know that the way out of, or to deal with this virus is through vaccination. So they better deliver, because we've had our hopes raised, and we've, to the point that some of the lacks in terms of, face space was because people were so hopeful and optimistic that the vaccine was going to deliver us. So they better deliver.
And what about healthcare staff getting vaccinated?
I think I would say that it's important. We are seeing healthcare staff get vaccinated. They need to be a priority because they are giving the vaccines.
And do you think they're being treated as a priority?
I think they are being treated as a priority, but clearly the most vulnerable people in society need to be taken care of first. And that's what the Joint Vaccine and Immunisation Committee, they are the scientists, after all, they understand this. That's their recommendation. And I'm not getting 3 times the salary, or nor is any other nurse that I know getting triple payments. But we are working 24/7 to deliver this.
Few more hands up. Cass.
There we go. Just in regards to the vaccine rollout, BAME communities continue to be disproportionately affected by COVID-19, yet a recent poll found that only 39% were likely to take the vaccine. What can be done by the government to regain my community's trust?
And what do you think could be done, Cass?
Oh, there's so much work. I mean, it all stems back from medical racism.
And what do you mean by that?
Things going around just in terms of BAME communities and things that have been done in terms of vaccinations in the past and testing. There is a complete mistrust there. And I think it's up to the government to do some serious work within the community to bring us back on side and help us understand and believe that we can trust them again.
Alex?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on kind of Boris Johnson addressing the nation. We're still in a national crisis, and I think he should be doing that every single day to give us an update on the vaccination programme. Instead, it just seems like he's hiding from the kind of problem. I want to see him up there talking to us every single day about it.
Right, well, you can report that back, Vicky, and see if he'll do it. Mike?
Thanks very much. I always worry when the government set targets. I was the victim of quite a few of these things. And particularly when it comes around to COVID, because I heard a lot of ministers early on in the process measuring one glove as one item of PPE when most people need 2. So I think the government need to be congratulated for the way that the vaccine is being accelerated. I, for one, was a skeptic that the scientific community would actually get a workable vaccine, because the coronavirus is a common cold, and we've had that loads of research over the years and never got a vaccine. So hats off to the scientific community and hats off to the government that we've certainly been ahead of the game in terms of ordering those vaccines. However, what I'm seeing now is where the government have kept over-centralising things. So they've got a push strategy for vaccines. So I've got members of my family who are in the health community, and they describe in the GP community setting up ready for their vaccines, only to be told the day before they were due to arrive that they're not arriving. So all of those hundreds of people who've been warned to attend over the next 3 days have then got to be de-warned, and all of the things that the GP could have been doing in terms of mental health, for example, haven't been done. So I would urge the government to listen to GPs. They're the people who know their patients. And as for the triple charging, I don't believe it. The way GPs were going to be paid for the double vaccine, they would only get the money for doing it after the second jab had been given. a lot of those GPs now can't give the second jab because they don't know when the next set of vaccine is coming. And if people want to be paid to work weekends, as they probably do if the vaccine arrives on a Friday and you've only got 3 days to give it, then you do need to pay loads of people overtime. And if you don't pay people overtime with extra money, then the GPs are going to have to take it from somewhere else. And that's a pressure on the NHS.
Well, the bonus, as I understand it, was for delivering vaccines in care homes, Mike. That's what that's referring to. Philippa, let me come to you. Scotland is performing fewer vaccinations when you look at it as a proportion of the population compared to England and Northern Ireland. So what's going wrong?
Well, if you go back to December, you would see that actually Scotland was the top vaccinator. And what we've done is we've virtually completed our care homes. So we had over 80% of our care homes residents vaccinated at the beginning of this week.
No, that absolutely is all true, but you're performing fewer vaccinations as a proportion of the population than England and Northern Ireland.
Yeah, and if you let me explain, obviously getting into care homes and taking the vaccine in, the Pfizer vaccine, we're all aware of the logistical challenges, is much more time consuming than lining up a lot of fitter people in a sports centre. But they were the #1 group from JCVI, and in Scotland that's what we followed. So as I say, well over 80% of them are done. Most places will finish that work by next week. More than half of our health and social care staff are already done. So we're working through the priority group, but that top priority group where you will save most lives take time. And it's only been because of our health and social care integration that we were able to do that with the Pfizer vaccine, because MHRA would only allow that when they could be sure that there wouldn't be wastage. And because of the integration, we know how many care homes we have in a health board, we know how many residents, how many staff, and NHS teams have gone out and vaccinated them. That takes time. When you look at using some big mega centre, what you're having is people having to travel further. And if you're vaccinating people who are over 80, lots of them will struggle with that. And, you know, we saw that in the media this week, people getting letters telling them to go from Coventry to Birmingham, and they're over 80 and they don't drive. And that has actually caused a lot of anxiety. So, you know, taking the time to get the vaccine closer to people so that it's in their care home or in their GP practice actually makes more sense. It'll speed up as we go further, and it's younger people like myself and other panellists who are getting vaccinated.
Let's take another question. This is something that's been much in the news headlines this week, from Jim Walker.
Thank you. It's obvious that not everybody is following the lockdown rules. Are the rules clear enough for the public to understand and for the police to be able to enforce them properly?
Well, Mike, I'm obviously going to come to you first with your experience as the Chief Con of Durham. What's your view?
Well, my view is that the vast majority of the public are actually following the rules. There are a few cases where people don't, but what's crucial about the law is that it's clear and people understand it, and what's crucial about policing is that they operate fairly and the public see the police operating as fairly.
And do you think the rules are clear and they are being enforced fairly?
Sorry?
Do you think the rules are clear and that they are being enforced fairly?
Oh, I see. Well, the rules aren't clear. So, for example, we've got this novel thing called local. You can only do things local. I spent 40 years in police and I've never come across that word in legislation. So, and in the guidance it says your village, town or part of your city. But nowhere in the legislation does it say that you've got to remain local. What it says, you can exercise and you should do it in your local area if you possibly can. But it's completely impossible to legislate for that. In Scotland, for example, there was a clear rule: you can't cross a local authority boundary. That's clear. It might not be reasonable, who knows, but that's clear. But we've got this mishmash of rules. We've had over 100 statutory instruments over the last 9 months. Every 4.5 days, a new act to be given to the cops. It used to take me in the olden days a year to train my cops with one Act of Parliament, let alone hundreds. So it's really difficult for the cops, and there's absolutely no doubt that occasionally we've got that wrong. And sadly, they get highlighted in the media, and the public then see this as unfair, and then you get a lower take-up rate in terms of compliance. So that's first thing. And should the police be part of this? Well, if we were to accentuate the fact that everybody was sticking to the rules, then we'd be an awful lot better off. But what's happening is everybody thinks that everybody else, we're pitting neighbour against neighbour, everybody else is breaking the rules, and that's not the case. The one area where we're breaking the rules is people sticking to quarantine when they've tested positive or they've been in contact. And we know this because the government have told us only 30% of people stick to the rules in those cases. And that's because 77% of the people who ask for support, financial support, to be quarantined don't get that money. It's only 70 million quid. It must be costing 70 million quid a minute to do the national lockdown. It isn't the lockdown that we need to be concentrating on. That's okay. What we need to be concentrating on is if people test positive or they can't afford to stay at home if they should be self-isolating, let's give them the money and incentivize that, because that's where the spread's happening. If you listen to the Wellcome Trust, the Nuffield people, that's where they say the big problem is.
There's lots of hands up. I want to hear from some of our audience. Colette.
I'd just like to say, I'd like to ask everybody on the panel, do they actually believe we're really in lockdown? Because if I actually go out of my house now, I'm a shielder, I don't see any evidence of a lockdown. I have family that work in the police, my daughter and my nephew, and they find it incredibly difficult to police this. You know, we keep adding tiers halfway along what we consider a lockdown. We've got non-essential shops open. My sector's closed down and wear full PPE in hair and beauty. But yet you can go to B&M, you can go to various retailers and have a day out. And our retail parks are absolutely rammed at the weekend and most weeks. So I don't believe we're in a lockdown. I think a lockdown means you don't go out your house and that's it.
Andy.
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to add on to something that Colette's just spoken about. There is a huge amount of difficulty in understanding exactly what lockdown is supposed to mean. I work at home, my work involves visiting people in their houses, and because that's not currently against the regulation, but I want to keep myself and the people I interact with and my family safe, I get, for want of a better phrase, earache from clients and customers because they see me as being reticent in engaging with them. What advice does anybody, either audience or panel, have how to get the public on board like they were before with the clapping for carers? I was part of an initiative making non-surgical scrubs. Where's all that? Where's the get the public on board, this winter's version of clap for carers?
Martin?
Hi, yeah, in Leicestershire, we've been in one form of lockdown since March. And, you know, I think people are tired of it. The rules aren't clear, and without the clarity of the message and the simplicity, then how do the police enforce anything? I just don't understand.
I mean, this is what one keeps hearing about, confusion about the rules, Vicky, and you know, can you sit on a bench? Can't you sit on a bench? Can you sit on a bench if you've gone for exercise, if you've got a bit tired and you want to catch your breath? Or if you sit on a bench and you bump into someone you happen to know, can you actually talk to them, or do you actually need to get out of there? Do you think it's clear?
I think it's really clear. People should, you know, people are dying a terrifying rate.
No, there's no doubt that it is necessary that people obey the rules, but do you think they're clear?
Should stay at home, protect the NHS, save lives, and they should be going out for exercise once a day with one other person. You shouldn't be sitting down having a long chat with them on a bench, and the police should be enforcing them. As we've said, the police have done a very good job, I think, throughout this of explaining the rules. You know, my own local police, every time they have to stop and explain to somebody that they've broken the rules, there's a note on their records that they've had to explain that once. If they get that person the next time, they'll come in with a stronger
So if they're having to explain it and you're hearing our
and
audience say they're not...
But
hang on, if they're having to explain it and you're hearing our audience saying it's not clear to them, how clear can it be?
So I think we've had those messages again today with Questedic, for example, the head of the Met giving those messages this week. You know, absolutely, the police are going to come and enforce. They've fined 45,000 people so far.
Yeah, because they did say there needs to be more clarity, since you mentioned her.
We will keep doing that. But explaining the rules and telling people, like you're saying, if you're sitting down having that chat with your friend and that person is constantly doing that, then they will get caught and they will get fined.
Donna? Donna's face. I don't know if anyone with the camera was on you, Donna, but Donna, it was a picture.
Yeah, so
Big
work
sigh.
from home if you can suggests, as we've said before, you're pitching the economic versus, you know, lives, really. And although it might be clear to some, if you think about it, work from home if you can, well, most people can't, a lot of people can't. And then if you take that one step further, what do I say to my employer? Because I've not been, the employers have not said close down, for instance. You know, I've got in my home a young niece that work from home if you can might mean it's necessary for her to go out to work. You've got builders that are, we know that when they sometimes are working on building sites, COVID is spreading. Work from home if you can is a bit of a loose phrase. And actually, we do need some more specifics in order to protect people. So I think, you know, sitting down having a chat on a bench isn't where we're seeing the spread happen. Actually, what nurses in hospitals tell me, it's the building sites, it's the people that are travelling on public transport. It's a range of places, but it isn't the people that are jogging and perhaps sit on a bench. So I think there is room for clarity in the messages. And actually, who we're stopping, who's getting infected, I think people in the nurses working in hospital will tell you there's a varying amount. But actually, we also know that this virus is so much more contagious. So where have we updated the rules in response to that?
Philippa.
Well, I think it's not really, you don't want to manage this by the police handing out fines or lifting people. And actually, all police forces have been very good at just trying to engage people, point out that they're, you know, pushing at the edges of the guidance. And I think that's absolutely right. The advice and the inspiration to stick to the rules has to come from public figures and particularly politicians. And what we see all the time in the House of Commons is actually the Prime Minister constantly being pushed by his backbenchers to make promises for end dates. If you look at the countries that have had the least economic harm, they are the countries that locked down really tight in March or February, that have controlled their borders strictly and have then eliminated a lot of the strains. In Scotland, the genomics shows that we eliminated almost all of 300 strains of COVID that had been here in the first wave. We got down to less than 1 case per 100,000. And then everyone felt they had a God-given right to go on holiday and start travelling, and we imported it, and we're going through it all again. But what we see in Westminster is the Prime Minister constantly flicking between public health and control the virus, and then, oh no, it's the economy. Actually, that's a false dichotomy. People will only engage with the economy if they think it's safe to go out for a meal. So we need to keep this lockdown until we get the numbers right down. And then, as Jon said earlier, it's about test, trace, and isolation. Testing and tracing doesn't stop the spread of the virus. It's only isolation that does that. And if you've got people who won't be able to feed their family, then they're not going to stay at home.
I mean, Philippa, I'm sorry to interrupt, but an epidemiologist on your own advisory group said that Scottish tracers are only finding half or even less of half than cases.
Oh, that's not true.
Well, he's on your own advisory group.
95% of cases and 97% of their contacts. Similar in Wales, because they're both been based on public health expertise and not outsourced to a company like Circle. But in the end of the day, if only 30% of people are staying at home when they should isolate, then they're out spreading. And what we end up is we're all isolated. So trying to put the effort into getting isolation to work with financial and practical support is the thing that would actually stop more of the spread rather than, you know, various gimmicks and setting a promise. The Prime Minister's already hinting as if lockdown might be lifted in mid-February.
Okay.
You're still going to have 5 more vulnerable groups that will not have been vaccinated.
John,
at that time.
let's come back to the original question. Are the rules clear enough for the public to understand, for the police to be able to enforce them properly?
Well, obviously, throughout the crisis, we've had mixed messaging. There's been times when it's felt like the rules have chopped and changed almost day by day. There's obviously been prominent Tory advisers breaking the rules early on in the crisis as well. But my concern about the way in which the debate plays out in the media, not the way the debate's played out this evening, is that it's about whether 2 people can sit on a bench or walk around the Derbyshire countryside with cups of coffee, when the reality is, yes, there is a risk of transmission outside, of course there is, but the vast amount of transmission takes place indoors. And as Colette and others on the screen have been saying, for many people, this is a phony lockdown. And it's a phony lockdown, not because of their own behaviour, but because they work for employers who are insisting that they go to work when they don't need to be. They could be furloughed. Or they work in public services and they need to keep society running. Or they work in parts of industry that need to keep society running. And we're not enforcing workplace standards to keep those places of work secure. We should have ventilation standards in the workplace. We should look at mask wearing in the workplace. We should look at distancing in the workplace. And then the second thing is, as we have heard, if you are ill, if you are sick, you should be paid properly to isolate yourself and quarantine yourself. And we are still not doing it. The government's own sage advisors say only 20% to 30% of people do it. The government have only funded £70 million worth of discretionary grants. Many councils say they've run out of these grants and can't even hand them out to the people who are applying to them. And yet they've allocated £22 billion to test and trace. Why not use some of that money that has gone to test and trace to pay people proper sick pay, to pay people proper financial support? You're not. £70 million. And you've got councils who have run out of these £500 grants. Councils turning people down who need money to isolate themselves for 2 weeks. You've not. You've failed.
Briefly,
Just really
very
quickly,
briefly, because I want to come on to one more
really
question.
quickly, people should be working from home unless it's impossible to do so.
No, well, we know that. We talked about that, Vicky. What would you like to respond to, John?
What would I like to respond? Absolutely, people should be getting that £500 to isolate,
need to increase the budget,
need to have that. But that also needs to be put in context with the huge amount of extra support here that's gone to families. The furlough scheme, the increases in the UC, the increases in the local housing allowance, the financial support that's been put there for families at the moment is huge, and we need to keep that because we must support. We must support them.
There is one question we must get to, because so many people have been talking about it, and we have a question about it tonight from Josh Noble.
This week, we have seen an overwhelming response to the free school meal hampers for children. Does this show a lack of leadership from our government, or are private companies being allowed to take advantage of our vulnerable kids?
Well, Vicky, you're Minister for Children and Families. What's your answer?
So I'm Minister for Children and Families, so literally I spend all my time thinking about how we can support vulnerable children constantly.
So how has this happened then?
Those packages that we saw this week were clearly unacceptable. Families have been under huge pressure, and we, from the very beginning, said we must make sure that families get the food and other support.
So why didn't they?
What happened was, obviously, we took the decision to close schools, very rapidly when we saw this new variant coming through schools. Schools have been given a choice of how they want to make sure that children get those free school lunches that they normally have. They could either have a package or have a local voucher, which is different from last time, local vouchers, and then we're standing up the national voucher scheme, which is going to be in place from Monday. Our schools will be able to start ordering from Monday. Those parcels that went out were those images were completely unacceptable.
And Vicky, can I ask you, because you said they were unacceptable, the Prime Minister said they're unacceptable, as has the Education Secretary. If they'd had, say, a couple more tomatoes, tin of sweet corn, bit of milk, tin of meat, that would have been okay?
So the food parcels that were
Can
going...
you answer that? Would that have been okay?
Not the food, let me be really clear that what we want the parcels to be doing is to be replacing what the child would normally get for lunch.
Because that's what you're recommending.
For lunch. And that is the recommendation for lunch for the 5 days.
So that they would have been okay, just with a couple more vegetables and a bit of meat.
So the parcels that we saw were completely not acceptable, did not meet the standards. I want to make sure, and were not balanced and nutritious. So I want to make sure.
And you're happy that what the government is suggesting is enough?
I've actually asked the contractors to go back and look at that again.
No, but what the government's suggesting, are you happy
so
that that is enough?
So I've actually asked, as the Minister yesterday meeting, to look at that again.
At your own guidelines?
Because since that came out, we've also topped up the funding for these parcels as well. So we did that immediately as soon as we went into the national lockdown.
So you're looking at your own guidelines again as to whether they're good enough?
Because they were produced earlier on before we then also put in extra top-up funding.
Right.
OK. So what we've done, and if you can let me explain, because this is an issue that's really important.
I know, but I also need to let everyone else come in.
Yes, but please let me explain without interrupting just for 1 second. It's schools' choices how they deliver this support, and the schools have the contracts with their caterers. We've given them the choice between doing a parcel, which has to produce the food for the 5 days for the child, or a local voucher, or a national voucher. On top of that, we've done masses and masses more. We've put in this COVID Winter Support Fund, which is another 170 million that supported children and young people and their families all through Christmas with parcels and food packages, and is there to support any family.
There's lots of hands up,
needs
lots of people shaking their heads. Shall we hear from some of them?
That's supporting families with their bills, their energy bills, their food, their clothes, if they're in emergency. We're setting up this massive project to support kids in the holidays because we've had issues in the past with kids struggling in the holidays.
I do have to let other people in, I'm sorry. Otherwise, the rest of the programme will only be you. Forgive me, I wanted to give you a good time, but I have to let other people in. Steph, I know you work in a school. Briefly, what's your experience, or what would you like to say?
I mean, our experience is we've gone for the voucher scheme because that offers our families the best value for they can at least go and choose what they want to feed their children. The packages and the food parcels are not good enough, what we've seen, and I think everyone will agree with that, and they're almost embarrassing. But it's also, we're also missing this whole chunk of our low-income families who are working. So we've got the free school meal kids. What about the ones that are just over that level? They're missed. I mean, I work in an area of deprivation, and I am so concerned about those families. We've got families who are kind of earning just the minimum wage, so just under £20,000, trying to feed a family of four. They've been totally missed. And I think they need to extend the free school meals to cover more people. That's one point. And then we've also got the fact that they're all at home now. And we've got families, their heating bills have gone through the roof. So there's lots of different concerns. But with regard, going back to the free school meals, they've just got to sort out those parcels. If you're going to do it, they've got to be good.
OK. Now we have not got a lot of time left. So I'm going to ask you all to be brief, if you would, Donna.
So as a public health nurse that works the streets, I've seen the impact of poverty on children and school meals, those receiving school meals. It was, as the Prime Minister himself said, unacceptable. And what I would say as a nurse, that we as a nation have a duty to feed our children well, and so that they can thrive, because they are our future generation. So actually, whatever it takes, I'm totally going to agree with you. That was not acceptable. It wouldn't be good for my kids or your kids. We need to get it right for these people.
Mike.
Well, the Prime Minister said that this was a disgraceful and an insult. What's disgraceful, it took Marcus Rashford for him to change his mind. And what's an insult is that you can't trust parents with vouchers or cash. They know what their kids will eat. And the Education Secretary said the companies that produce these should be named and shamed. They shouldn't. They should be sacked. And why are we employing multinational companies that had profits of 1.8 billion quid to deliver these food packages and why are we giving food packages in a pandemic full of COVID, all of those encounters? Why not you just electronically transfer the cash? there's no risk of transfer of COVID, and the parents can buy what's needed for the kids.
Mike, I've got to say that almost unanimously you're getting thumbs up and rounds of applause from everyone on the audience here.
Mike.
Yes, but it's not what's been happening. Philippa, sorry, I'm going to have to ask you to be brief.
Yeah, well, I mean, what we've seen was the government be embarrassed by Marcus Rashford in the summer, in October. We're seeing the government being embarrassed again. I mean, child poverty across the UK has soared in the last 10 years of austerity. You simply have to invest in children. They can't learn at school if they're hungry, if they're cold, or if their home life is so stressed because their parents are constantly stressed out of their heads over every single penny. So stop all the nonsense with packages. Trust the parents and give them the money. They know what their children will eat.
The school has that choice, Philippa. They've had that choice from the very, very beginning. And this is, and by Monday, we will have the voucher plan as well.
During the term, they were getting parcels. John?
I mean, I've got to say, Vicky, any private firm that thinks it's acceptable to give kids halved carrots and pasta in money bags that you use to count your 2 pences with shouldn't be getting a slap on the wrist from the minister. They should have their contract stripped off them, and they shouldn't be anywhere near children's catering. The second thing is, these firms are getting away with it because this was the guidance you issued to them. And the third thing is, it's now been on the news today that you're not going to give kids free school meals over the February half-term. That's a disgrace. I hope it's not true. And if it is true, go to your office tomorrow and sort it out.
So, John, I'm not only going to give them the meals over the half-term, I'm going to give them more. And that is what we have already announced.
So free school meals this February half-term.
That is what we have already announced, that we will make sure that every child gets that support.
Free school meals.
And the children who are not at school.
So they're going to get free school meals.
So they will get the support, as they did over the Christmas holidays when they were not.
Fine, because it's in the news saying you're not.
They got that support over the Christmas holidays.
Fine. If the news is wrong, that's fine.
Including, and I really don't want to get cross here because I want to support these children. But yes, there are families who are really struggling, who don't fit in that free school meals. That's why we put up the Winter Support Fund, okay, to make sure that it is there. There's some families whose children are not yet at school who need help. There's some families, and that is why we have put that there to support them. And that's why we've also increased the universal credit amount. We've increased the amount that's there for their rent, and we've put in that winter support package.
Can I just check?
Support
Vicky, can I just check? Because it sounds like you've made a pledge now. I want to be clear what it is. When you're saying that children will get free school meals at the February half-term, do you mean they will get vouchers or not?
I have said, so we started planning for the February
just tell me what it is. We're almost out of time. What are they going to get?
November. And it will be going through the local authorities we've given the funding to. Some of them did vouchers, some of them did parcels, some of them did holiday clubs as well.
So it'll come through the local authorities.
And that is what we've already set up.
So they'll get vouchers for free school meals this Feb.
What we did all over the Christmas period as well, when they were not there at Christmas. And that is what we... And you didn't complain once about the support at Christmas because it was fabulous,
free school meals
and it will be
this February
fabulous,
is that what you're saying?
And it will be fabulous. And incidentally, one more thing, those contracts are not government contracts.
No, what about the free school meal vouchers?
And there is no
we are out of time, but by all means, feel free to continue having a row when we're off air. But that's as far as we're going to get with this tonight because our time is up. Thank you very much to the panel. Thank you very much for coming tonight. Philippa and Mike, thank you very much for joining us down the line from your respective homes. And, of course, to our audience, thank you so much. I'm sorry I didn't get more of you. I'll definitely try and do that next week. And, of course, to you at home, thank you so much for watching. From Question Time, bye-bye.